In this lesson, I will talk about Windows rights and permissions. Let's talk about a scenario first. Your friend comes over and they knock on the door. You look through the peephole and see that it's your best friend. I authenticate them because the picture in my mind matches the picture on the outside of that peephole, matches the person. So I allow them in. I am authorizing them to come in. They asked if they can go to the refrigerator and grab a Coke, which I say yes. And they go to the refrigerator, grab a Coke. Then they come to me and say, hey, do you mind if I borrow your TV for a little bit? And I say no. Or you say no. Well, that whole process has rights and permissions associated with it, just like Windows does. Each object, for example, the Coke or the TV, can have different rights and permissions on those objects, just in the same way that we have objects like files and folders inside of Windows. So let's log into my computer for a minute. And I authenticated into my computer. The password's matched. And exit out of Server Manager. I'm going to go to those two folders that we created called Secure Documents and Poorly Secure Documents. If I right-click and press Properties, I'm looking at the access control list or the access control entry for this object of secured documents. Now, how does one actually be allowed to get information? Now, when I authenticated into the system, I was able to get an access token. The access token consists of the security ID of the user's group security ID, and the rights that the user has permission to on the specific machine. So each resource or each object, such as the Secure Documents folder, has an ACL on it and access control entries into it. So right here, here's my access control list, and here's my entry. The logged on user may or may not have access to this folder. I may not have access to read or execute or list the folder contents. Okay, so in this case, the Stooges have access to this folder. Let's say I deleted that information, and you can always find the security ID if you want to dig through some of the registry settings, but it's really not important. When permissions are granted and when they are taken away, that security access token and the permissions associated with it change. So in order to access certain things, when I'm granted access in an enterprise domain, I have to log out and ask for that access token again. So then I need to, let's cancel out of here. I would sign out and sign back in to get another access token. Let's go back here to my Secure Documents folder. So my access control entry allows me to choose any number of allow or deny functions. Deny is always more powerful than allow. So if I'm part of the Stooges group, for example, and I deny myself from reading or executing, that is going to override my allow function within the Stooges group. So be careful on that when you're denying users access to certain things. Whenever we access an object, such as a file or a folder, the Security Reference Monitor, or SRM, looks at the access token provided and compares that to the ACL on the object, and then the request is either granted or denied. Depending on how you have your domain set up, you can also audit all this information just by going into some of the settings for the domain and choosing whether or not we want to audit this process. Auditing means logging. Do we want to log whether a user accessed it, or do we want to log if a user denied it, or maybe both? We also have a concept in Windows called rights. Rights are a little bit different than permissions in that they are standard ways of logging into something or doing something based on a series of actions. For example, allowing a user to log on through terminal services. This is a right that users can have. Or log on as a service. We can deny or allow users to do this. Now, why we would want to use rights in this case is if we have service accounts or if we have accounts that we don't want accessing certain systems. So we would deny the right to log on to certain systems depending on what information we wanted to have the user access. So in conclusion, looking at rights and permissions is something that a domain administrator or a system administrator is going to perform constantly. When the administrator is also looking at those permissions, we need to make sure that allow and deny functions are set appropriately.